Is it working? Hopefully it is. And my printer has wrecked it. That's helpful. Right, I'm going to have to print quickly. Sorry about this, but that is one of the slides which has come out, which is really not good enough. Now, my plan is today to do something slightly different. So, bear with me, because it might be completely terrible. It might be absolutely brilliant. I'm not really sure. But my idea is that previously what I've done... Hello! Hope this is working. Right, so... Previously what I've done is I have uploaded on TweetDeck the slides in a pre-order and then probably got them to actually go there. Now, what I'm going to try to do today is I'm going to try and press the upload when I reach them so they flash up on on Twitter. That may or may not work. If it doesn't work, I apologize, and what I'll do is I'll get all the slides put up at the end. But I'm crossing fingers. It's a theory. It's something I've been trying, but to try and make it more interactive, to try and make it easier for you to follow when I'm using the slides, that's what I've been trying to do. But so thank you very much for everyone joining. I hope I live up to expectations. And helpfully, the printer also managed to mangle my slides when I printed them out for me to use. So I'm just having to quickly print them. Well, 2 of them now. It's always when you have the idea. So, how is everyone doing today? I hope you're all well, and I hope you're enjoying life. Right. So today is Destroyers in Norway. And what does the Royal Navy get up to? Now, thank you. And this is these are what have caused all the trouble, because these are the ideas I came up with. So, to do a quick comparison of Destroyers in Norway and the Royal Navy getting in there, I prepared basically quick grab sheets. So, these are the old ones. These are the middle-aged ones. And these are the newbies. This is all going to, in theory, work on TweetDeck and start working when I want to. It's going to click up and actually appear on Twitter. So, that's good. Right, so, Destroyers in Norway. Hang on. Right then. One of the also ones it's managed to mangle up is my map of Norway, but it's not mangled it up that bad. So I can still use my map of Norway. This, as we all know, is Norway. It's actually turned into a very, very important area of battle. Maybe you can make your own subreddit and put the pictures there as it could be an interesting idea. It's an idea to work on subreddit. I'm going to concentrate on the presentation for now, but I am taking ideas on how to improve this, because I will always point out I am a historian, and as good as I am with computers, and trust me, as a dyslexic, I'm dependent on them, I am still learning a lot about this stuff, especially the YouTube, and making it more interactive in terms of, because as these lives are only a few weeks old. So it's me trying my best. And also, it's still me working with a camera phone, because the actual... I ordered this for teaching, by the way, about a month and a half ago, a video conferencing webcam that I could use on my computer and do this all properly, and actually could have been putting the pictures up. It still hasn't arrived. So, Amazon, thank you for that. Really proving its worth right now. So, as you will notice when you see this one, I have put some things in here to explain the V and the W class and what happens to them, because they start out as these ships and they evolve. But also what I want you to do is look at the fact that the Royal Navy has so many destroyers. And let's make sure this tweet goes. Work for me, work for me. Let's click on this, click on that. Can someone please tell me if Twitter has just worked? Norway looks the same whichever way around. Yeah, Norway is one of those wonderful countries which always looks like a bit missing. But this is Norway. Now, yes. And also, before I'm into things properly and I get carried away and completely forget things, I'm going to, apologise because I am going to get carried away. There are some battles in this which I really, really enjoy in Norway, and I am going to get loud, so I apologise for that up front. And 2, thank you to everyone who's subscribing, who's sharing, who's following, who's tweeting out about it. As I said, I am looking to get to the 1,000 for familial bragging rights. So, you know, versus my aunt, I love her dearly, but familial bragging rights are something which never dies. So that's why I'm keep asking people to please keep sharing. And thank you again to my Patreons. They're very, very kind. They're funding my next research trips. So, the first involvement of Norway that really takes place, and I've already done a whole series on this, so I'm not going to get into too much, is the Altmark incident. Now, the Altmark incident is interesting because of 2 things. 1, the Germans flagrantly flout. Yes, I will be covering Warspite Swordfish, Will. I always cover it. That swordfish is very special to me, especially as I have had arguments with professors over the years telling me it was a walrus, until I sat in front of them with the pictures of it and went, this is the actual swordfish. I'm not getting into that King of Sparta. So, firstly, the Altmark incident is a violation of Norwegian neutrality by both the Germans and the British. Secondly, the Royal Navy very much put the Altmark under siege, and then the Cossack comes in. The Altmark's already been cooped up. There's a light cruiser and 2 smaller destroyers sitting out there. But they know very much that a light cruiser is too big to go into the fjord, and the 2 little destroyers are too small. So until a tribal destroyer comes up, the Royal Navy ain't going knocking. And then the Royal Navy do go knocking with a tribal class destroyer. Why am I bringing the Altmark incident in, though, to this, when that happens in February and Norway campaign doesn't happen till April? Well, because it starts to lay down a marker. And for the Germans, this is very critical, because for the Germans, their destroyer force is small. It's piddling in comparison to the Royal Navy. The example I give is I did a rough back of the piece of paper calculation on this, and the Royal Navy are producing something like 5 destroyers for every single one the Germans are producing in the late 1930s. And there's a guy called Admiral Henderson keep cranking out even more every chance he gets. So, this means that the Germans are always at a slight disadvantage with destroyers, so they try to build them as big and as powerful as they can. In which case, they consider the tribal class to be their benchmarks. And they are bigger than the tribal class. This is going to be interesting later. Now, this is all fine until about April. Now, the reason I say about April is both the British, French, the Allies, and the Germans have plans for invading Norway. In April. Yes, Matt, that is true. I think in 1940, Germans did have 20 destroyers in commission. The RN had 150 odd. The RN had about 200 odd, I think, is the actual figure, because once you're considering reserve, Royal Australian Navy, Royal Canadian Navy, all the rest, I think you'll find that the Royal Navy has about 10 times the number. And especially they have reserve fleet who they've reactivated and all sorts of things. So they have all sorts of destroyers going around. So the good old Germans decide to invade Norway. Now, before anyone thinks that the Royal Navy doesn't think this is coming, please have a look when I tweeted up at the story of HMS Glowworm. And HMS Glowworm is cool. And I will tweet this out quickly now, because I'm presuming, because no one said anything, it has worked. Slide set 2. So I'm going to hope it's working. Boom. Let's put that out. HMS Glowworm. And boom. Now, so HMS Glowworm is dispatched north with HMS Renown and 7 other destroyers. Basically, this is a flotilla heading north, a force heading north to make sure to block anything that the Germans might be doing, because the Royal Navy is currently having its nightmare. Remember, its nightmare is not the invasion of Norway by Germany, although that's a pretty scary thing. The Royal Navy's nightmare is a mass German task force breaking out into the North Atlantic. And this is what they think is happening. So the reason the Germans actually get an advantage and manage to get into Norway without getting stopped by the Royal Navy on the way in is pretty much because the Royal Navy is looking at things and seeing its nightmare. It's not actually seeing what's going on. It knows Scharnhorst, Gneisenau are at sea. It knows a whole force of destroyers and a whole force of other things are at sea. I've just had a thing flash up with me saying back-end error. I'm hoping you're all still there and it's all still working. Hello. The Royal Navy are basically seeing what they think is their nightmare. They think that the Germans are sending a mass task force into the North Atlantic. And they think it's destroyers and everything heading their way. And so they position their forces. If we go back to my map of Norway. Thank you, Will. The Royal Navy positions their forces up here, which means the Germans managed to get round behind them. Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you. It scares me a little bit when it says back-end error. I'm not sure what that means. So the Royal Navy is positioning its forces up around this area, and the Germans managed to sneak in. But the Germans don't sneak in. Chaffers and Bray, we were all set to invade before the Germans, I thought. Those ships unpacked and then repacked due to faulty intel. No. The Royal Navy and the British Army did have a force ready to go. They just didn't want to invade unless they had to. Their plan was to secure Narvik, which is going to come up in a bit, and Trondheim. But it didn't happen because they decided they didn't need to. And then the Norwegians had a problem with their activation, in that the Defence Secretary said, well, we can activate in 2 ways. We can either do a full mobilisation or a partial mobilisation. The Cabinet goes with partial mobilisation, not realising that that doesn't means that they do it by post rather than radio, so as not to do a full broadcast and let out the whole world know. Whereas if they'd gone with full mobilisation, it would be announced on the radio. And that might have made certain parts of the Norwegian forces, which we will get to in a bit, far more alert. Anyway, so the lovely Germans managed to sneak past. But on the 5th of April, the Royal Navy Task Force headed by HMS Renown heads up. On the 6th of April, HMS Glowworm gets detached from that force. Okay, she gets detached because there's a man overboard. And they're sort of still getting into wartime mode, because honestly, sending out back a destroyer for man overboard, whilst it's nice and everything, in this kind of water when you're this close to heavy enemy units, is not really possibly the most sensible thing in the world. Thank you, Tim, for tweeting at me that the pictures are fine. Thank you. So, what happens is that Glowworm comes across two of the larger German destroyers, a 1936 and a 1934A. Now, here's the thing. Glowworm is a G-class destroyer. She's not the biggest in the world. You will find them in the fact file that will come out in a second. In fact, they're in the same fact file with the 1934A, which Bernard van Anden was part of them. And she is taking on a ship which is roughly 1,000 tons heavier than her. And two of them. So, now, I know possibly I perpetuate this as more than any, but I mean that the Royal Navy, when I say the Royal Navy Destroyer Force is aggressive, and when I say the tribal classes are even more aggressive, I sometimes need examples to illustrate this. In this case, I have HMS Glowworm, outnumbered, and both ships twice, almost 1,000 tons on her. She still engages them. They are, of course, have troops aboard, are heavy, can't maneuver, so they cry for help like little babies. No, seriously. They make a very smart strategic position, and they call for assistance to deal with this little destroyer, which is starting to annoy them, nag them, and beat them up. And they do. They get assistance. Admiral Hipper comes along. So let's consider this a moment. Two supposedly supreme German destroyers, because I do see the fact pages where people look at these destroyers on paper and they go, they are amazing, they are brilliant, they have these big guns, they're wonderful. And then you go, hang on, but two of them, and they're calling for help against one of these little babies, well, these British destroyers. Anyway, they call for help. And they're part of Task Group 1, these destroyers. Hipper is part of Task Group 2. Hipper comes to help them. Hipper does, of course, being a heavy cruiser, manage to destroy the Glowworm. However, the Glowworm fires torpedoes and rams Hipper in the end, possibly with her old crew dead, and pretty much takes it out as far as the Norway campaign is concerned. So, the Germans have so far in the Norway campaign managed to have a operationally sense a cruiser taken off the board for the cost of a Royal Navy destroyer. The Royal Navy are really enjoying Norway so far. Also at this point, the Royal Navy starts to realise something isn't going on right. Thank you, Will. Does Glowworm call Renown for help? Glowworm does get off messages for help. And Renown then gets pissed off and starts steaming south as fast as she can. She realises Glowworm's been sunk. Now, Renown is, of course, a battle cruiser, which has been upgraded into the interwar period. And Glowworm is a G-class. I'll put them up in a second. So, she is one of these pretties. I'll put them up in a second. Now, Renown comes south. Renown runs into Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. Renown is, as I said, a battle cruiser which has been modified in the war, but she still should not be able to take on two battleships. Renown is so pissed off, and I know I'm using this phrase a lot, but it's coming to say, that she actually attacks very aggressively these two battleships, so much so they decide to run away from her. Okay? Two battleships, armed with very thicker armour, much stronger, decide they have to run away from a World War I era battle cruiser which has been reformed because it's handling itself so aggressively. This tells you a lot about what the campaign is to come. Gordon Collins, could Glowworm have dropped depth charges when it rammed Hipper to try and break its back? Probably not. They might have tried if they'd had enough crew left in positions at explosive positions. They had been raked by heavy gunfire. This was a ship which was about a tenth of the size of the Hipper to try and take on them. Testimonies. Does she not outrange them, though? I think you're referring to Renown versus Scharnhorst and Eisenhower. Technically, no. Technically, with their gunfire, radar-directed systems, etc., they should have been outranging her. But she scores the hits and they run away. King of Sparta. Aggression might suggest backup. Maybe they thought there were more. Possibly. Possibly they did think there were more. But honestly, if you can only see one battlecruiser, the chance to wipe a battlecruiser off the lines, ooh, that's very tempting. Now, I'm going to tweet out the next set of pictures. And hopefully once they're up, I can get into the battles, which you're going to find me getting really, really loud on. Now, oh, well, let's start off with, I've got a picture of HMS Renown, which is coming out. Right, so there's now a picture of HMS Renown come out as well, just because I like her. She is a ship which is really quite interesting. Hi, Mum. Sorry, I just had to do that. Right, so yes, sea conditions in that encounter made the Maelstrom from Pirates of the Caribbean 3 look tame. Yes, definitely when HMS Glowworm and the Admiral Hipper are fighting, it is pretty heavy. And Renown versus Eisenhower and Scharnhorst was definitely a fun time as well. And she is beautiful. Now, this gentleman is the person I want you all to remember. Lieutenant Commander Gerard Bromheed Roop. He doesn't get enough thought and enough remembrance, but he wins a VC. And he wins a VC as recognition for what his ship does. And the bravery of his crew. And that's the thing. In the nicest way, Altmark incident, Glowworm, these are starting to lay down markers for what the Royal Navy expects of its destroyers and what they most importantly expect themselves. And this leads us into our next confrontation we're going to discuss. Because the Royal Navy starts sending convoys around and starts having things going on. And on the 9th of April, one of the Royal Navy forces is moving around, is being escorted by a treble-class flotilla. Well, an ad hoc flotilla made up of ships from both 4th and 6th. The F. And they're coming under heavy air attack. And very heavy air attack. So HMS Gurkha, who's commanded by one of the best gunnery officers in the fleet, according to his own things, Commander Sir Anthony Buzzard. That's a name, come on. Commander Sir Anthony Buzzard. Goes off to engage them. Actually turns his ship to charge. Now, before I get into the further that, wasn't Gunther Lugens in command of Scharnhorst and Eisenhower, was it his style to avoid combat with capital ships? Not really, but he was very cautious. And must remember the rules of engagement, which I've discussed before, of a lot of the dictatorships are very, very conservative in terms of preserving their capital ships. They're very, very worried about losing these ships, these beautiful ships, these big national pride. Whereas the Royal Navy goes, they're ships, they're built to be used. And the British government goes, we'll build more. It's always nice when the government's behind it. Anyway, the reason I want you to put onto this, and I want you to look specifically at the stuff for HMS Gurkha, which is up, this slide, are the quotes. And I could read Philip Vian's quote. I always love to read Philip Vian's quote, but I'm not going to. I'm going to read Ronald Hamilton Curzon Halifax's quote. And he's the Rear Admiral Destroyers at the time. And the reason I'm reading his is because he's this kind of a good overview. Captain D, 4 of the 4, in paragraph 1 of minute 2, has generously accepted responsibility for allowing Gurkha to become detached. But his minute was written on the 22nd of April, by which time all or most of us had realised that to remain concentrated was the best defence against air attack. Whereas on the 9th of April, when the attack took place, this was not generally realised. Destroyers escorting Norwegian convoys when under air attack had often been out of supporting distance from each other, and no harm had come to them. I knew this and had issued no instructions on the matter. I do not therefore consider that Captain D4 is any more to blame than I am, except for the omission to notice the Gurkha had detached itself completely, as opposed to taking independent avoiding action. This is something I want you to all think about as we're doing this discussion. The reason I'm doing Norway and Destroyers is because the Royal Navy learned so much in this period. They learned so much. Yeah, testing this. It's easy to say we'll build more when you have the production facilities of the British. Yes. And also they are starting from a far larger number. But they do have to patrol the whole world. So it's very easy to justify also being cautious because they need so many more ships. So yes, they can build more, but they need so many more. Now, HMS Gurkha detaches herself to charge down an air attack. Now, you can think a lot of things about that. You can think it's stupid, it's foolhardy, all sorts of things. What I think of it, an HMS Gurkha, is that it's a commander doing the best they could at the situation. And it's them still learning. The Royal Navy is still learning how to deal with air attacks. It's still going with interwar exercise theory and various other ideas. And suddenly they're not being attacked by heavy bombers. They've only been doing exercises against their own dive bombers for the last couple of years. They don't really know as well as they can do what they're going to do. And no one really knows what the capabilities are until you have a proper war. Because until you have a proper war, it's all theoretical and exercise, and it's all done with nice and safety rules, and no one is trying to kill each other. Really. So things change. And April and the Norway campaign are a period where the Royal Navy goes from here to here in terms of its desire for air defence, in terms of desire for everything, and in its destroyer handling. So, and that one. And we'll do that as well. Right, so another suite slide set are coming out. Now this slide set are all about these ships, and we're going to start talking through the destroyers because I've now got 2 sets out. So I'm going to leave 1 set behind. They're going to come out in a second. I'm going to talk about these 2 sets. So, Royal Navy have 2 really large groups of destroyers in terms of their bulk formations at this point. They have these, which, barring this class, we're talking about World War I vintage vessels, which are being modified and encouraged. Sort of they're being enhanced, but they're still knocking around in some of the flotillas. And the classes which start with the AB class, ordered in 1927-28, which have become the bulk of the Royal Navy's destroyers in terms of their fleet actions. They're critical. These are the next ones. A lot of them. Testudines. Were those exercises again done with monoplanes or biplanes? They were done with whatever aircraft were available. Honestly, the Royal Navy would take whatever was available to do an exercise. And Vincent van der Veen. How much wartime experience did the RN gain in 1939? Not a lot. They did gain some, but you have to remember it's a phony war period, and whilst the Royal Navy are treating it very much as a full war, the Germans are sort of playing a bit behind their shoulder, with their hands kind of tied behind their back. They're trying to be peaceful. And by this time, we're talking about April 1940. We've moved in months into the war, and the war has grown from being... It's slowly growing up and getting bigger and bigger. But mostly the ships are well built before World War II begins. So as you can see, these are the examples of what they've got. And you've got the German ones in the middle. The 1934 and the 1934As. The 16 destroyers, which are the core of the German Navy at the moment. So, when I tell you that the force which is being sent to Narvik contains 10 destroyers, you're talking about half the German operational force. We're also talking about a difference in terms of philosophy, okay? The Germans have gone with the 5-inch, the 5.9-inch guns. The Royal Navy are the 4.7 inches. Royal Navy are very much interested in speed of fire, in speed of range, in engagement. The Germans are building far bigger ships, far more complicated ships. They have certain abilities versus the British, and certain abilities versus the British have certain abilities versus the Germans. I would say, from my looking at them, the British are far better handling for their crews. Now, this might well be to do with experience. Sarah Wolf, doesn't the Graf Spee count as wartime experience? The Graf Spee does count as wartime experience, but it's one surface raider down in the south versus multiple Royal Navy cruisers. It's not really experience for the destroyer crews, and it's not really experience for the fleet actions. There's also the Deutschland operating up in the North Atlantic, but she gets called home rather quickly. I can't think why. I think it's possibly because the German government is worried about the Deutschland getting sunk. And the Royal Navy getting the crow they sunk Germany. Because let's be honest, the Royal Navy would. So, I'm being very, very non-PC/PC today. There's a reason I'm wearing this top. Because, in the nicest way, I'm about to describe a battle which makes Stalingrad, well, is on a fairly similar lines with Stalingrad in terms of its dirty fighting. Strub, we routinely speak about officers, but did the quality of enlisted crew make a difference? Yes, the quality of enlisted crew does always make a difference. But in the case, the quality is the same. I'd say in the same, the raw abilities as the Germans and the British Navy. But the British Navy have an advantage in that they have far more sea time, they have far more experience. One of the examples I give, and I put this very specifically, I mention this in the notes which I'm going to put out about the first and second battles of Narvik, is that the German commander for the first and second battles is a 43-year-old Commodore, Friedrich Bonte. The 43-year-old the Royal Navy commander is a 44-year-old captain, Bernard Warburton Lee. Now, in the nicest way, the Royal Navy's captain has probably got a lot more experience at sea than the German Commodore, but they're so short of officers that he's experienced enough, he's made a Commodore. But has he got as much experience as the Royal Navy captain? Probably not. So this makes a difference in how they're going to be handling ships, and it also makes a difference in how they're going to be training crews. Okay. Bandholm. Would the Germans have been better off had they dropped the raiders to build more destroyers? If you want to put a task force into the North Atlantic, you need destroyers. And this is one of the big problems with Norway. Night Hero Production. I'd really like to see how a hypothetical scenario of KMS Deutschland get taken out by Renown or Hood. It wouldn't have been pretty for Deutschland. Sabewolf, the... Pretty much. Jonas King of Spartan and Crandu Publications, yes. The Germans are... They're trying to build what their version of tribal class destroyers, but whereas the Royal Navy went with a cruiser form but destroyer weaponry, the Germans were in many ways trying to pick cruiser weapons onto a destroyer, and it didn't work. They wanted to put bigger and bigger guns because they wanted to engage at long range. And the trouble is you can't engage at long range. It's nice in theory, it's terrible in practice, especially once you get into the fjords of Norway. So, the first battle of Narvik is when the Germans, and this is up there, the slide is up on Twitter, is when the Germans managed to engage the Norwegian defence ships. Now, I'm going to try and pronounce them, but my Norwegian is not great. So it's the Eidsvold and the Norge. Now, these are quite powerful individual ships. And honestly, they would have been presented a big problem for the Germans, apart from the Germans had brought 10 destroyers with them, including the George Fiel, the Wolfgang Zecker, the Brand von Arm, the Erich Gess, Erich Collier, Dienfer von Roda, Hans Uhrmann, Hermann Kuhn, Wilhelm Heinkamp, and Anton Schmidt. So, those are all 1934, 1934A, 1936 destroyers. These are all the most new destroyers the Germans have available. They're best destroyers, and they've sent them up to Narvik. And they get into Narvik. And they sink the two Norwegian defence ships. By the way, the two pictures I have here of ships are the Norwegian defence ships. My theory being I was going to put out pictures of destroyers separate anyway, so frankly, these ships deserve to be remembered. But the officer sitting there is the very interesting Captain Bernard Warburton Lee, who's another VC. He gets a VC for the second Battle of Narvik, and the second Battle of Narvik is this. The Royal Navy learn that there are German destroyers, and possibly submarines, sitting inside of Narvik. Warburton Lee is ordered to go and investigate, but use his own judgment and decide whether he goes in or not. He has 5 H-class destroyers, so these are not that older ships. They are equivalents of the 1934s in terms of age. They are not old. And he has HMS Hardy, his flagship, HMS Havoc, HMS Hostile, Hotspur, and Hunter. With names like that, does anyone think he's going to back down and go home? No, he doesn't. He goes in. He has 2 advantages. One, the German picket destroyer, which they've been planning on basing, they had come back in for fuel, and they hadn't sent anything out to cover it, which suggests that the Germans were either not expecting attack, were incredibly overconfident, or were just being silly. I'd go with A and B, but I always offer C as an option because they do seem to have some very strange officers in their destroyers. There is a first battle and a second battle in this second battle. There's a first phase and a second phase. In the first phase, the German destroyers are surprised. They lose 2 ships, including their flagship. Another one is damaged. Okay? And the 6 merchant ships which were with them, which had helped carry supplies, along with all sorts of other merchant ships in Narvik Harbour, are destroyed. Then the Royal Navy destroyers themselves get surprised by Germans coming from further up the fjord. So the Royal Navy have surprised them, they're now out of formation and they get surprised. And they lose 2 of theirs. So, can I please put to bed the 2 points of view? 1. Occasionally I do refer to the second Battle of Narvik, or first in Royal Navy parlance, as a draw, because both sides lose 2 and get 1 injured, in terms of ships. But for the Germans to lose 2 ships, that's 40% of the force they've sent up there. That's a loss of their navy. That's 10% of their available destroyers. Gone. For the Royal Navy to lose 2 destroyers, We discussed the figures range between 150, 160 to 200, depending on how you weight in the RAN, the RCN, the reserve, flotilla, all those things. And as such, 2 is not a big loss. For the Germans, it was a big loss. So, at this point, of course, the Royal Navy withdraw. The Germans have lost their commanding officer. A sensible solution would have been probably to try and withdraw. They can't. This is why I talk about Stalingrad and the Battle of Narvik. Because the German squadron is laid under siege. There is a Royal Navy light cruiser and some other destroyers sitting offshore. If the German destroyers go out of the fjord, they will have to fight them. So much for German air power securing victory in Norway. So, what's this leave us with? Well, the Germans are in Narvik. They're caught and they've lost a lot. The Royal Navy is outside and it's getting ready to go in. And when I say it's getting ready to go in, the ships which it's forming up are its big ships. So, it has Warspite coming along. Now, Warspite wasn't actually supposed to go in. They were going to send in another battleship with, I think it was, King George V or something, one of the newer KGVs. And it was going to have the deputy commander aboard. Of the fleet. But Admiral Whitworth is looking at his destroyer crews and thinking what he needs to do. He needs to go with them. And he needs to go with them for 2 reasons. One, and neither of them are he's a glory hunter. So when I see accusations about that, about Admiral Whitworth, I really get annoyed. The man is the furthest you could get from a glory hunter ever known to mankind. He is pretty much sitting there going, my destroyer crews are out for blood. Why are the destroyer crews out for blood? Well, there was Glowworm. She's been lost. There was Gurkha. Was lost. These 2 were lost in different battles, but they were lost. Then there were the 2 H-class. Hardy, with Captain Warburton lead, and those lost. The Royal Navy destroyer crews considered themselves an elite within the Royal Navy. The tribal destroyer crews considered themselves the elite charged with protecting that elite in battle. The tribal class destroyer crews are even more pissed than the regular destroyer crews, and the regular destroyers are annoyed. The tribal destroyer crews, Whitworth is looking at and he's going, they are, and he uses this great description in his diary, which I've sort of heard about from one of his descendants, not actually managed to see, so I'm not going to write it in any book, but I can use it here with those provisos that it's something I've heard about but I'm not seen. So they were frothing for the enemy. That's a cool phrase. Slightly weird and disturbing, but a cool phrase. Anyway, the third Battle of Narvik happens. The Germans have been held up. The Germans are still held up. They start to try and position themselves. They've got destroyers which have been injured actually moving around the fjord. A couple of them have been damaged doing that. They start to position themselves at various points. They want one to go into an ambush position further along the fjord. It actually takes up a position further along the fjord, not as far along as it wanted to be, but further along the fjord. And it's in position, ready to ambush. And unfortunately, he gets spotted by Warspite's Swordfish spotter plane, its float plane, which is launched off to take off. And so, as the force comes round the corner, the 4 closest destroyers, including HMS Cossack, open fire with everything they've got. We're talking about 12 torpedoes are racing towards this ship, and somewhere in the region of 100 4.7-inch shells end up in the air within about a couple of minutes. Okay, it's not a nice place to be on that ship. And just when they're sort of weathering that and they're already sinking, dying, HMS Warspite rounds the corner and goes 15-inch shells. Bye-bye. So that's the Eric Carla. Bye-bye, gone. Now, the battle continues. And there, it's a running battle. It's a running battle. There are 3 tribal class destroyers on one side, 1 tribal class destroyer on the other side, 3 destroyers in the front with their sitting in front of Warspite with their all their stuff extended to try and stop mines getting through. They've got their sweeps out to try and stop mines. There's more destroyers everywhere the Royal Navy can put them. There are destroyers. So there's 3 tribals on the starboard side. No, 3 tribals on the port side and a tribal destroyer at the front on the starboard side with 2 regular destroyers behind it. It's very much a fighting formation first. HMS Punjabi gets damaged at one point. She falls back. Whitworth thinks she's going to fall out of the fight. And then, about 10, 15 minutes later, he sees her racing past him at full steam, charging, and she's rearing up, going so fast, putting so much power into the water. The tribal class destroyer, HMS Punjabi, is actually rearing out the water. She's actually starting to try and lift her bow up and almost plane. She's going that fast. So, again, tribal class destroyers are supposed to be able to do 36 knots. For them to start planing, we must be talking somewhere in the region of 40 plus knots. Okay? So she was planing to get to the enemy. And you've got Eskimo and Cossack and Bedouin keep pushing at the front, keep pushing the Germans back. At one point, some of the Germans try and push themselves into Narvik harbour. And they set up other ships as blocking links. And what happens is they're hiding behind us. They've got ground forces, everything, hiding behind, firing at the fleet. HMS Cossack doesn't like this. So HMS Cossack, this tribal class destroyer famous for the Outmark incidents, what does she do? HMS Cossack charges straight over a block ship in a sort of nearly 2,000-ton destroyer version of "Here's Johnny," and starts blasting away at everything around her. Basically, methodically wipes out an entire harbour. Just keeps going bang, 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 bang. And is completely destroying the area. Now, of course, Giants Kingdom Command isn't risky to send a BB up a forward when you know there's enemy destroyers there. Or is this battle area in large envisioned it? It's really not. This is the fjord we're talking about. Okay? HMS Warspite gets about as far as here. Alright? So she sails up the Austin Ford with the destroyers around her. Now, the interesting thing is some of the lovely German destroyers run up this way. Okay? It comes up. Yes, Sal Machado. Pushing ships at high speed in shallow water can cause effect to happen as the props suck in water from under the front of the ship. Yes, they do, and it causes rise up. As I said, that's why my dad worked out the stat for me, so I'm not quite sure about how he did it, but he reckoned it had to have been going, for it to have happened like that, it would have had to have been going at 40 knots. So we can see Royal Navy destroyers at this point, theoretically 36 knots is the maximum speed, but they're pushing up to 40 knots somehow. What happens next is, of course, the German destroyers are retreating even further. They're losing numbers. They've already lost about 4 of them, and 4 of them are retreating on further. So Cossack is currently sitting on top of a hulk in Narvik harbour, destroying that. Punjabi and Bedouin are protecting Warspite against any destroyers which might come round. Eskimo is leading off the F-class destroyers to chase down the German destroyers hiding at the back of the fjord. So to chase the German destroyers hiding back there. And this is the moment which gives German sailors nightmares for the rest of World War II. So there's a bend, right? The Royal Navy, the destroyers in F, the F destroyers, the Foxtrot and, Foxhound are watching this and going, okay, so Eskimo's going to slow down for the bend. She's got to slow down for the bend. You can't take the bend that fast. She does sort of lose speed. And then as she comes round the bend, she increases up. Now, she's firing the whole time. She's firing everything she's got. The Germans see this destroyer coming. Their whole plan is to try and suck the British in, fire at them, and use a sinking British destroyer to block the harbour, to try and give them safety, try and give them protection. So they fire their torpedoes at the Eskimo. She managed to dodge 4 or 5 of them, but she gets hit by one. She loses her bow. She loses the front gun, A gun. Okay? B turret continues firing. Eskimo herself continues turning to bring her own torpedoes to bear and fires a spread of torpedoes at the enemy, and then advances at the enemy stern first. So she's advancing towards the German with her bow hanging off and in the water at an angle so B position can still fire. X and Y turret providing the principal fire stern first. So if you imagine it, she's sort of, if you're the Germans here, she's coming at you at this angle so she can keep firing at you. At this point, the Germans are probably considering that the Royal Navy is possessed of madman. They're insane. And just to add to their worries, more Royal Navy destroyers are pouring round behind Eskimo. Foxtrot comes round behind Eskimo, is basically going, holy guacamole! What's happened to you? Don't you want to withdraw? No? Okay, fine, I'll get in behind you. I'm coming. And Eskimo is actually leading the Royal Navy destroyers at one point up the fjord until eventually the Royal Navy destroyers other destroyers do get past because, basically they haven't lost their bow. They aren't dealing with problems here at this point. And aren't advancing stern first. Yes, basically Warspite have been brought with the Royal Navy destroyers, to try and stop the destroyers going completely homicidal maniacs. That's a bit overstatement. To stop them going completely off the rails and losing any control, any semblance of force. Actually, it didn't need to. They were very controlled the whole way through, but they were certainly incredibly aggressive. And you can understand why the Germans end up beaching their ships. They actually beach them so fast they ruin them. They can't be reused for the rest of the war. And they basically run ashore. So, if anyone remembers the Altmark incident, there the German crew ended up running ashore. And at Narvik, the German crews end up running ashore. They have a choice. Die at the hands of Royal Navy destroyers, who are vengefully packing them into a corner, or get ashore. I'm going to repeat this comment from Juno 191. Let's face it, Warspite is fond the child, the destroyers are her children. More than likely. So, Narvik is this maelstrom battle. It's this absolutely pitch perfect for the Royal Navy destroyer battles. And it's a series of them. This wipes out a lot of what happens for the German Navy because they can't do it. They can't do what they wanted to do. They can't send a major task force out into the North Atlantic because they haven't got destroyers to escort it, which means they have to rely on weather. They have to make sure the weather is really, really bad for their ships to be able to try and get out. All these sort of things. This is the biggest limiting factor on the Germans for the rest of the war when it comes to fighting Britain. And, by the way, some people like to do the whole Narvik versus the Battle of Britain thing for the air attack, for which was the battle which stopped the German invasion of Britain. Well, let's be honest, Sea Lion was never really much of a chance because the Germans never had the amphibious capability really to mount it. They had a lot of ideas, none of them good. But you would have needed destroyers and air power to even stand a chance. You would have needed both. So you lose either one of those battles, and let's be honest, they definitely lost the destroyer one. Battle of Britain, yeah, I'd say that in a nice way they didn't achieve what they set out to do. They wanted to wipe out the Royal Air Force, they didn't. So, that was the Operation Sea Lion effectively stopped. Testing lines. Could they have built more destroyers pre-war? The Germans could have built more destroyers pre-war. You could have built a lot more destroyers pre-war, but could you have crewed them? Could you have put any more experienced people in them? Honestly, we're not sure. And they were never going to devote the resources to it. Because if you devote the resources to building more destroyers, because you can build more destroyers, those resources have to come from other things. They have to come from your submarine program, your battleship program, your tank program. They have to come from somewhere. So the Germans put as much resources into destroyers as they were prepared to. They didn't put in enough, but they did put in as much as they were prepared to. Now, the other day, I did a quick one on the next event I'm going to discuss. And frankly, I'm going to do it again because I love it. Namsos. Okay? So, Royal Navy destroyers are involved in other amphibious operations in Norway. They're pretty much involved in everything. But pretty much the day after the Battle of Narvik, so after the 13th of April, when the Battle of Narvik takes place, we've just been discussing, on the 14th, you have tribal class destroyers and other Royal Navy destroyers getting troops into various landing points to try and scout out where the best place to put in the British forces. The central campaign is that they choose Namsos. The trouble is with Namsos is two things. One, no one wants to take a cruiser in there. It's too tight, it's too annoying, and it's too close to airfields. Two, you don't want to take in the big liners either. So, all the troops and all the supplies going in, they're going to have to come in either escorted by destroyers or on destroyers. And in a first for Royal Navy history and British Army history, the entire Central Norway campaign is pretty much run from a tribal class destroyer, i.e. a destroyer. These ships have enough space. And yes, Will, this is Adrian de Kaarten de Weert. Probably who Action Man should have been modelled on. If you want a hero of who you want to be when you grow up, or who the Black Knight is modelled on, it's this guy. Loses an eye, loses an arm, still carries on fighting. Churchill sends him out to help run the Chinese army because, frankly, he's too old to be used for the British army, but if he doesn't use him somewhere, he's going to get himself into trouble. He gets sent all over the world. The man is to quote one of my younger cousins in slightly bad language, I will apologise for this in front, a certifiable badass. He is cool. Anyway, they get involved with everything. So you have destroyers being used as command ships. And if you consider what happens later in the war at D-Day and Salerno and all sorts of other operations, when you're talking about the invasion of Sicily and these things, destroyers and small ships are getting used as command ships. Well, it's the tribal class, it's the Royal Navy's destroyers in Norway which show this will work. It's after experience of reading the reports. The Third Sea Lord Bruce Fraser, after reading the reports of Norway, of what the tribal destroyers got up to, he goes and gets out the landing headquarters ship plans, which Henderson had drawn up under his tenure, and starts to put them together, starts to sort of formulate them, and then Mountbatten jumps on and goes, oh yes, this is a great idea, combined operations, this is what we need this ship, yes, it's amazing, and Bruce Fraser's sitting there going, I've already ordered it. But Mountbatten, of course, claims he did it, and he's the master of all our landing ships. Yeah. How Mountbatten didn't get strangled by a more senior admiral during World War II, I will never know. There were so many who wanted to do it. So many. Anyway. So, the most dangerous thing, though, for the destroyers in Namsos was the extraction. And this is a forerunner of Dunkirk, of many, many operations. The Royal Navy managed to extract them by night on destroyers. And in fact, this caused the General de Woert to state, in the course of the last endless day, I got a message from the Navy to say that they would evacuate the whole of my force that night. I thought it was impossible, but learned a few hours later the Navy do not know a word. Sebra Wolf. Right, the first troops ashore at Namsos. The first people aboard ashore were Royal Marines and Royal Navy sailors taken off cruisers to secure the initial area. Then the first proper troops ashore were French. Then they were followed by a British brigade, and then another French brigade, and then another British brigade. It was a combined operation. They were put under the command of General de Woert because no French general wanted to go. I think is the actual expression. They thought it was Central Norway was not going to be a safe place to go. They did well, though. And frankly, my argument often with the Central Norway campaign is if we'd not done the Southern Norway campaign, if we just concentrated on the Central Norway campaign and the Northern campaign, we could have strengthened the forces up in the north to the point at which they could have come down to support the centre, and the centre could have held off the German forces in the south until the north arrived, and then they could have taken back Norway. But that's all hypothetical and a naval historian looking at it and thinking about it. I have spent way too much time in the Norway campaign. Now, the Norway campaign comes to not really an abrupt end, but it slowly fizzles out in terms of the Royal Navy needing ships elsewhere. And in terms of once the troops are withdrawn, that's what's going to happen. The Germans are going to have uncontested control. There was a question earlier from Testudines. Where are the RN's carriers during this, both as command posts and support? Okay, the RN's carriers are providing support. And famously, I'm just having a mild blank on which one it was. HMS Glorious, of course, gets sunk by Scharnhorst and Naso. And actually, there is a reason why I chose for the earlier picture of the A-class, I chose a very specific Royal Navy destroyer. And if you go and have a look at them, you will see her. Because when she is sunk, she's being escorted by Castor and Ardent, who are sisters of Achates. Now, Juno 191. Could Scharnhorst and Naisal prevented what happened at Narvik? That's the interesting thing. If the Germans had sent a force to try and save the destroyers, they could have possibly got there, but there would have been a far bigger battle. Because remember, Warspite isn't the only battleship hanging around. In fact, there's quite a few of them. There's an aircraft, there's Glorious, there's Ark Royal, there's all sorts of ships hanging around. And you know, the Royal Navy has a large force up there. So, yes, they could have possibly prevented what happened at Narvik, but they could have also ended up sunk themselves. As it was, they've been scared off like little girls by HMS Renown. And eventually they do come back, though, and they sink Glorious and they sink 2 destroyers. But the 2 destroyers, the Arden and Costa, managed to actually attack very, very hard. And again, provide more honour for the Royal Navy destroyer force if it needed, more proof of how aggressive and how well trained they were, that they didn't break, they didn't demur, they went straight into action. At no point did they consider anything other than going straight for the Germans. You know, honestly, if you're talking about it from the destroyer crews, from saying themselves, the Germans were going to concentrate on their carrier. So the destroyers, if they'd wanted to, could have broken away, run away, and the Germans would have destroyed the carrier and left them alone. They'd have probably got away safe. But instead, they charge to protect their carrier. because that's what they're trained to do. That's their duty, despite knowing that that is almost certainly death. And they do know it. Please, no one sit there and think that the Royal Navy officers who were making those decisions, and even the sailors aboard their ships, didn't understand what they were doing. As they piled on steam, as they loaded their guns, as they swung their torpedoes out, they knew exactly what was going to happen. But they still did it. And that's the important thing. It's the same with HMS Glowworm. It's the same with HMS Gurkha. They all knew exactly the odds they were facing. In fact, Gurkha's commander makes no bones about it in his report. There was such a heavy air attack inbound. This was the full might of the German Air Force, and we hadn't enough destroyers to protect against it. So I thought it best to try and get in range to try and shoot them down. But also the fact that Gurkha turns to engage them means that all the German aircraft concentrate on Gurkha, and the rest of the convoy, including the completely unarmed civilian ships carrying troops, carrying supplies, carrying people, get away safe. So, Juno, you do sum it up correctly. They know exactly what odds they're facing. This is one of the reasons why I'm writing the book I'm writing at the moment about destroyers, and why I'm doing this, because the Royal Navy destroyers really do fight a war the whole way through. And Jonas, King of Sparta, Britain had centuries of naval tradition. Germans were starting from scratch, and it showed in their sailors. I would never put the German sailors down. I would say they fought well. But I would say you have a small disadvantage. The Royal Navy has hundreds of destroyers to grow their officers, to grow their chief petty officers, to give them time at sea, experience, all the things that are necessary to build an elite force. The Germans don't have that luxury. There is that old saying, mass is a quantity all of itself. Well, mass, when you're in peacetime, is a very much quantity all of itself. Because mass allows you to train more. Mass allows you to have a larger number of officers, a larger pool of people to draw from. So you tend to, when you get talking about the top 5% of 100,000 people, that's 5,000. When it's the top 5% of 100, it's 5. So it's a lot more options. So the Royal Navy destroyer crews could afford to be very, very good. They could afford to be picking. And remember, not everyone made a Royal Navy destroyer crew. So, when Norway is all over and the campaign is over, the Royal Navy's interest in Norway doesn't end. And that's why my presentation, whenever I talk about destroyers in Norway, and actually, this isn't a random presentation. This is actually something I actually gave a local group, wanted a history presentation to fill in for a day about a few months back. And I gave a version of this talk. Operation Claymore. And actually what I've done is this slide, when it comes up, is entirely from my book. It's entirely draft of it. So if anyone notices any spelling mistakes, any grammar mistakes, anything like that, just be kind and don't tell me, okay? Not until I get through the editing point. Don't tell me. I don't need to know. It'll give me a nightmare. I love you all dearly, but just no need to tell me. So, Operation Claymore. Operation Claymore is the first commando raid of the World War II, the first proper one. And it is mass. It is everything you can dream of. It has the first specialist landing ships the Royal Navy has in service. It has tribal class destroyers. It has a J-class AA destroyer. It has everything they can chuck at it because they're going after oil. Not the crude stuff though, the fishy stuff. Believe it or not, in World War II, fish oil was actually worth more than crude oil. The reason is fish oil is crucial for making weaponry, and crude oil was a lot more easier to get hold of. Plus, fish oil smells a lot more ickier, so let's be honest. Anyway. So, this should be the last slides to go up. He says, And hopefully it works. So, it's got... Operation Claymore has many, many famous people. Operation Claymore is one of those operations which is interesting for several levels. Let's see. The first point I find interesting about Operation Claymore. One, there is a Royal Navy landing team sent ashore to try and use and capture some ships. But they don't tell that the Royal Navy tribal crews that they want a particular refrigerated ship as their ship to take home. So the tribal crews, being efficient as ever, actually decide to wipe out basically every ship in the harbour. And they take out this particular refrigerated ship. There's also the famous signal which goes from one of the land officers to a tribal class destroyer going, would you perhaps consider going further out into water? You're currently scaring me, you're getting so close to the shore. The response from the tribal class destroyer was shouted by a loud hailer, no, we're just making sure we can see the targets before you need us to see them. There were some very restrictive rules of engagement, and a lot of destroyer crews were worried that they would not be able to, as one of the requirements was positive identification of enemy before they could fire, that they would not be able to provide sufficient support for the ground troops. They did. Anyway, why does this all matter? Why does Operation Claymore matter as part of the destroyers involved? Because it's the first commando raid, and it also shows the involvement of destroyers in them. From this point onwards, destroyers become a critical part of many commando raids, and the destroyer crews, especially the tribal crews, become as close and as protective of the commandos as they become of any of their destroyer buddies. In fact, they consider it a critical part of their duties. You see this when HMS Somali and other destroyers get involved, in HMS Zulu, in incidents off Tobruk. And they end up getting sunk because they will not leave the commandos behind. They will not desert them. Now, the other reason why the tribals get focused on is because they become, especially after the Elmark incident, rather like Ark Royal, a totem of British naval power, especially in German press. So the Germans are always claiming to sink the tribals, like they're claiming to sink Ark Royal. Every destroyer they sink is a tribal. Every carrier they claim to sink is Ark Royal. It's lovely. What is interesting, though, about the Operation Claymore versus Norway in April in 1940 and Claymore in March 1941, a year later. The tribals by this point all have X position changed for a 4-inch AA gun. And they have a J-class destroyer which is only armed with 4-inch AA guns on it. So they have a far stronger air defense on these ships, far stronger air secure anti-air AA defense built in. And basically, the reason the tribals are sent is because it's felt that they have the best all-round firepower. Because, and here's this great phrase, and I swear this is where we get the modern phrasing from. They're deciding they want this formation to be as organically capable as possible. So they pick destroyers. They don't pick cruisers. They don't pick carriers. They don't pick battleships. They pick destroyers. Because this force is going into the Lofoten Islands. It's going in close. So it needs its firepower to be able to come in close with it. It needs to have air defense. It needs to have all the capabilities. So that's what they built. And that's why Norway is where the Royal Navy destroyers come of age and where they show their capabilities. Bandholm. Weren't the destroyers more or less the most effective close support ships in most of the landing operations during the war? Yes, they were. They usually got in closest. And especially some of the destroyers get a really, really good name for support. HMS Tartar, one of the tribal class destroyers, is nicknamed Lucky Tartar, and one particular set of Royal Marines had a belief that as long as Tartar was assigned to any operation they were going to be involved in, they would win. So as long as they knew Tartar was providing fire support, they were fine. And there were several times when you get people calling up on the radio going up, we need fire support, da-da-da-da-da. And Tartar was one of those names known. So they'd actually call out and go, is Tartar available? And Tartar would usually respond, what do you need? Don't worry, we'll move to make sure we can engage. I think at one point they are measured at being 20 meters off a beach. So technically they've possibly run aground by that point. But they do all these things. And the Royal Navy destroyers throughout World War II are this critical force for Britain. They're the critical enabler. The Germans lose their destroyers early in the war. They Narvik, the two battles of Narvik, number 2 and number 3, destroy so much of the German destroyer force that they not only wipe out. You see, the battles of Narvik are critical not only for the ships they take out, but the men they kill. The fact that the Germans lose so many of their experienced officers, their experienced NCOs, this is what takes the heart out of their destroyer force. It's not just losing ships, it's losing people. It's losing the capabilities. So, that's the destroyer way. Juno 191, you and Drakenfennel would make a great collaboration. I think we have actually recorded something recently, which Drakenfennel is going to put out on his account. So I look forward to when that does come out. Guilty of bias. Yes, finally caught one live. Hello. Right, so, any questions? Jonas, King of Sparta. I guess individual excellence is more impactful on a smaller ship, so it makes sense for destroyers to be the elite. Yes. Basically, the smaller the crew, the more essential it is the individual's experience and the more each one has as a value. So that is why the destroyers do consider themselves elite, and why the tribal class destroyers, which consider themselves an elite of an elite, are really, really very good. Most importantly, though, you have to remember that they not only consider themselves an elite, they hold themselves to that standard. When you're dealing with tribal destroyer crews, when you're dealing with battle class crews, when you're dealing with 1949 Darien class crews, when you're dealing with several of the destroyers in World War II, they consider themselves an elite. And when you've got an elite within an elite, they hold themselves to that standard. So it's not so much the Germans are fighting a destroyer, they're fighting to destroy its crew and that crew's image of itself. HMS Glowworm, HMS Acasta, Ardent, these ships would not withdraw because that would have been against their own self-image. The tribal class destroyers, HMS Punjabi, she was badly damaged. Any ship could have happily fallen out for that. She didn't just come back, she charged. She races back into battle because that is what she expects of herself. That is what all her crew expects of herself. The captains on the tribal crews often comment, they don't have to motivate their ships. They don't have to push them. Their main job in life with their crews is to actually make them take a rest because they don't think they need to take a rest. They don't want to take a rest because they are the elite. They're holding themselves to be the best. Right, just quickly. Sal Marshallano, anyone else wish Alex would show some more emotion and enthusiasm during these broadcasts? Yeah, I'm a very staid British character. Chappers and Bray, do you do interviews for other channels? Well, I have for Drakenfennel. I wouldn't say no to anyone else. See what they would want me to say and what I want to talk about. Juno 199, what would be worse for the enemy? A destroyer or a battleship when it comes to support? If the battleship is on point, you've got 14, 15, 16-inch shells coming down on you. That's not a fun time. It might be from longer range, and it might take longer to happen, but it's tough. Will C199, is the video with Drakenfell about Henderson? No, it's about cruisers. And it's very fun, and I'm not sure when he's going to produce it, because he's kindly taking on all the editing and all the stuff work. So it's all up to him. And I just had a really great time recording with him. Bandholm, did the Italians or IGN have something that can be compared to the tribals? Lots of navies built what were classified as destroyer leaders, which is what a tribal class was technically classified as. They're different, though. They're building super destroyers, and the tribal class destroyer are cruisers built in destroyer form. And there is a difference in terms of their actions, of how they treat themselves. Again, it's hard to say something, but the Royal Navy destroyer arm is something special. And in many ways, the US destroyer arm only reaches it under the leadership of Arleigh Burke and later in World War II. They don't have it at the beginning of World War II. The Japanese destroyer arm, I wouldn't really like to say, but from their actions, I think they're very, very brave, but I don't think they're ever quite the same. Chaffers and Bray, were the crews for the tribals especially selected? The officers and senior NCOs certainly were. There were officers who were turned down for tribal destroyer commands, who were otherwise very good officers but weren't considered aggressive enough for tribals. The Royal Navies for destroyers was specifically looking for their most aggressive officers. There is no surprise that Philip Vian, who even though he's had ships, managed to sink his own ships in being aggressive in exercises and coming into harbour and these sort of things, is chosen to command a tribal destroyer flotilla. Verton Sumi, what was the destroyer's crew's thoughts on the Didos? I have gained an impression from somewhere that the Didos functioned as destroyer leaders. Is that correct? Okay, the Didos were technically built under the Royal Navy's requirement for a rear admiral destroyer's cruiser. And if a tribal class is a cruiser in destroyer, a cruiser in destroyer form, then a Dido is a destroyer in cruiser form. It's packed with everything and actually ends up not being used as a flagship that often at all because they are so cramped. They're very good AA cruisers, but they really are not great cruisers overall. They are ships which are useful in wartime, but not really great in peacetime. Draken for now, about mid-May. Thank you very much. That's when it's coming out on Draken Fennell's channel. Him and I having a chat about cruisers is coming out about mid-May. Juno 191. Destroyers retreat. What is that word? Our guns still work. Yes, we still on speed. Yes, then we attack. Yep, that's exactly what they thought. Stillan, what do you think RN destroyer aggressiveness owes to RN destroyer actions in World War I? To be honest, the Royal Navy's destroyers were being crews were being picked. The torpedo crews, boat crews, were being picked for leading these sort of things, for being aggressive from the very beginning. The Royal Navy always understands that these small ships are going to need to be aggressive, and in many ways, they're looking for the same spirit that had been seen in their frigate captains in the Napoleonic Wars. They're looking for these people who are independent raiders, who are aggressive, who are going to go and engage the enemy. That's what they're looking at for their destroyers. So World War I proves it and enshrines it, and the Harwich force under Tritt goes extra and extra miles to really demonstrate it. So they get it into them, and then there are 20 years of exercises, of selection, of every kind of event that they can think about, which inoculates it even further. So by the time you get to World War II, the Royal Navy Destroyer Force is something which is on its own. It should be... I would argue that the Royal Navy Destroyer Force is an elite force in World War II. And I would argue that it should be considered alongside the other elite forces when we're talking about the US Army Rangers, when we're talking about commandos, even the Special Air Service and those sort of things. I would say the Royal Navy Destroyer Force ranks up as an elite force. We never normally consider it as such because it's so large, because it's using these ships and because it's sort of doing this. But honestly, the way they act about themselves, the way they treat themselves, their culture, what they expect of themselves, these are all things which you would associate with a very much an elite force. Guilty of bias, the 8th Host. Would the Atlantis be similar to the Leanders? I think I talk about that in the interview with Draken Fennell, so I'm going to leave that to him, to that interview. But please do pay attention when that comes out in mid-May. Could have, Juno 191, could have Blucher have been saved from a fate in Oslo? Probably not. Testudines, the spirit of Nelson and Cochrane then. That's where this aggression comes from. I would say to an extent it is definitely coming from that sort of era. It is the Royal Navy. One of the interesting things about the Royal Navy is they don't really read history, but they are imbued in history. The Royal Navy, our sort of approach to history is not so much as we'll go away, read it and learn from it. It's part of their everyday. It's part of their culture. It's inside them. It's in here and in here. And that's how they expect themselves to act. And that very much comes out in World War II in some of these destroyer actions. And also in some of the other operations we're going to get onto. You know, when I'm looking at landing craft, you're going to hear some of the things the landing craft crews get up to is frankly absurd. But they're doing it because they think that's what they need to do. We'll see 99. The US sailors at Java Sea thought the RN destroyers were very well handled. They did. The US Navy had a lot of respect for the Royal Navy destroyers. And they found them very, very interesting to work with. They picked up a lot from them. And the Royal Navy destroyers picked up a lot from the Americans as well. They liked the way the Americans handled themselves in a loose formation. And the Royal Navy destroyers have been working on that, but they basically used some of the American ideas to make themselves even better on it. Bring Deeps. Is RN aggressiveness in World War II partly an attempt to refight Jutland? I would love to be able to go and say no, but I would say definitely, as we were discussing last week, no, yeah, or was it last Tuesday? When we were doing the global war, I think that was last week, global war. The Royal Navy are looking at refighting, not so much refighting Jutland, as the First World War, they haven't had the chance to fight the enemy. The enemy hid from them. And therefore, all this aggression, the need to be the victories, the heroes, the traditional role they've been, had been stopped because the enemy hadn't come out to fight them. So in World War II, when the enemy comes out to fight, yes, we will take them. We will get them. Exactly. And as we'll see, 99 has just pointed out, HMS Rawalpindi is another example of this, of the Royal Navy going and fighting them. Right then, it has now been 90 minutes almost. So I will say any questions. Because then, after we've dealt with a couple more questions, I will go and get some tea. Because I'm hungry. I should really eat before I do these things. That and probably drink more iron brew. Okay? Right then. Right, well then, as there are questions come through, hope to see you all Sunday for the special. The special is going to be looking at carrier design and looking at what affected the Royal Navy carrier design, how the carrier fleet of 1944 came to be. Thank you very much for coming, and as always, please do share, please do tweet about this, do all those sort of things, because as I said, and subscribe if you can. If you haven't subscribed, then please do subscribe so that I can, as I said, win the bragging rights versus my aunt. It's important to me. What's your book going to be called, and when do pre-orders start? It's called Tribal Battle and Daring Class Destroyers, the genesis of the modern destroyer force, and it's coming out with pen and sword, and if I get it to them on time, it's going to be out in October, fingers crossed. Please post photos of your bookshelves. I will do, but that's my ready access bookshelves. That and those are the ready access ones. There's also those. And there's boxes everywhere. Right then, take care. Have a nice evening. Thank you very much. I'm hoping I haven't missed any questions. Nope. Take care. Thank you very much. And have a good night. Take care. Thank you, Juno. Thank you. That's very kind of you. I have your money already. Thank you. And again, thank you again to all the patrons and those people who are helping me, because that money's really going to be useful. I'm going to use it to support my future research trips and my archive visits so I can find out more research stuff and do all these things. And again, for those people who are going to buy my book, thank you. That will be even more pleasurable, because the book's important to me because it's going to have the story of Admiral Henderson in, and it's also going to have the story of all these destroyers in. And you see how excited I get. If you imagine that the book is written how I think. I don't know how to write any differently from how I talk. So it's basically me on a page. So you probably need to read it with some iron brew in your hand. Take care. Thank you very much. I better go now and get some food. Thank you very much.